and welcome to this month's edition of Knott's TV Book Club, a time and place to talk about books. It's lovely weather for ducks, me ducks, so join us to dip into our new book of the month with no need for an umbrella. This month's title is recommended by the Writing East Midlands Youth Board, who've chosen a bestseller you'll have seen winking at you in eye-catching piles in bookshops. It's Yellowface by Rebecca F.Kuang. And joining me to talk about Yellowface are this month's Fresh Face panel from Nottingham UNESCO City of Literature, Hannah Trevarthen, hi. From the Writing East Midlands and Nottingham Playhouse Youth Boards, Carice Hutchinson, hello. And from Waterstones and Bad Betty, Jake Wildhall, hi Jake.
Hey.
Hello. So, how are you, lovely panel? Okay, yes, you can speak.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Nice and dry after all of that very wet weather we've been having.
Horrible. So, Hannah, tell us about Big City Reads. We looked at the books. What actually happened?
Well, thank you so much, Becky. So we wrapped that up on the 12th of August. So we've been digesting that and we have been crunching the numbers, and we have reached through digital, events, press, over 1 million people.
Wow.
1 million people have found out about Big City Reads. So we're really
Incredible.
delighted that people have been engaging with that.
Yeah, and the books were fabulous.
And they were brilliant. So thank you so much for having us on the book club to talk about
You're
them.
very welcome. Jake, hello.
Hello.
First time on book club.
Oh, I'm very
Looking
excited.
very colour coordinated there with a lovely autumnal sofa. Very nice. Tell us about Bad Betty Live.
So Bad Betty Live is a monthly night that me and my partner run in Peggy's Skylight, which is a beautiful jazz bar in the middle of Nottingham. We have 4 poets and 2 musicians every month, and the next one is November 3rd.
Okay, great. So I love Peggy's Skylight because on their website they describe themselves as convivial. It's a very nice word. It is a very convivial place.
Okay, listen, I'm going to level with you, Becky. What does convivial mean?
It means kind of cool and cheerful.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think. Is that okay? Do you think that's right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jake. Let's move on. Carice, so you're on the Writing East Midlands Youth Board and the Nottingham Playhouse Youth Board. What does that actually entail?
So it's a group of 18 to 25-year-olds, and our main aim is basically promoting the arts in Nottingham, especially to people who haven't heard of it, people who have just moved to Nottingham and are looking for something within the arts sector to do, people who might not be able to afford it. And sometimes we help like assisting workshops, or we give like a youth perspective on how to run things. And yeah, I really love being on both of them.
Fantastic, Carice. Yellowface is the best-selling novel from Rebecca F.Kuang. Kuang is also the writer of the Poppy War fantasy trilogy and Babel, set in the 1830s. Yellowface picks up on some of the themes of empires, power and identity in Kuang's other writing, but from a contemporary perspective. Friends and authors, so this is the plot. Friends and authors June Haywood and Athena Liu are both supposed to be the rising stars of publishing. Everyone knows Athena, but June is a literary nobody. When June watches Athena die in an unexpected accident, she acts on impulse, stealing Athena's just finished masterpiece. June tries her hardest to escape Athena and become a success in her own right and in her own right, lying about her theft to keep herself in the spotlight, but aware that her deception may crumble at any moment. I can't tell you how many people have told me they love this book. But what did our panel think? So I'm going to go to you first, Carice. Mm-hmm. So why do you think the youth board particularly chose this book for book club?
So it was one of our members, Priya, that mentioned it for book club, and Priya's Indian. So I think from a perspective of someone from like an ethnic background, Yellowface stood out to her and stood out to me and the youth board as well as like how publishing works, and like specifically how Athena was represented as like the token Asian person, and how a lot of Chinese Americans actually didn't like her because of that reason. And as a youth board who are interested in writing and books and publishing, especially for ethnic minority groups, it was a read that resonated with all of us.
Great, that's a really good explanation. And I wanted to ask, to kind of hand over to this other sofa, because you're both involved in one way or another with the world of publishing. Do you think this is a fair representation of what the world of publishing is like?
Oh, Becky, I think as somebody who is in what I would describe as a publishing adjacent role and see a lot of this world, I think it was a very biting satire of the industry, and I think for me a lot of it rang true, and that made it in some ways a uncomfortable read, I think, for those, and a good way to kind of think, well, actually, like, has the industry really changed that much? So I think, you see it across the board. What does it mean to be a writer from, the South Asian diaspora, or even, you hear things about like, oh, well, what does it mean to be a Northern writer? Well, we've already got like 2 Northern writers. We don't need any more of those.
Yes, and people don't want to read books about Nottingham. Apparently. Apparently.
We need to change that.
Yeah, we do need to change that. But so Jake, you've been in Waterstones for quite some time.
Yeah.
They let you out today.
They did.
Yeah. So what happens in a bookshop when you get a book in and you know it's tipped to be a bestseller? Like, does that happen by accident? So, for example, if you get a Richard Osman, what happens there?
If a book's tipped to be a bestseller, we're going to merchandise on it heavy. We know what's coming. I think what's happened in publishing over the years, because of companies like Amazon, is that the middle ground of publishing has gone. So there is lower independent authors and then the big names, and it's rare that people break into the big names. So you'll see all similar titles on tables, face out. It's very rare that a debut becomes huge or someone breaks in, because industry is based around selling books, and it's part of the reason people get pigeonholed instead of allowed to do more creative work.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you all before we finish and move on to this part of the show, do you think that bookshops really influence what people are reading? Are we just reading what we're told to read? What do you think, Carice?
I think one thing you see like when you walk into a bookshop is like the TikTok section, and like what I thought of when you said that was book talk, and that influences a lot of people these days. It's really getting people into reading, not necessarily people who are writers or like big readers of people who have never read before. So I think that section is like a particularly big influence on what people are reading.
Do you agree? Are you book talkers?
I'm not on TikTok, but I think what this book captures really well is the publishing machine and like what the kind of publicity happens and how as a consumer, and like if you're not aware of it, how much that actually influences the way that you might see things in bookshops. But I am a firm believer in being hand-sold a book by a bookseller. So if I was to go into Waterstones and Jake said, you should read this book, I would 100% do that.
And if they've got those small recommendations on, even if it's challenging, which is really interesting because by coincidence, our roving reporter, Sam, paid a visit to the Writing East Midlands Development Day recently, which was held in Waterstones, and he was finding out which books they found challenging.
I'd probably say Herc by Fenneker Rogerson is kind of a challenging book to read, but not in the conventional sense that it's like difficult, but just in how it's written. So it's about Hercules and like all of his different, like his entire story, minus all the bits that kind of make it really confusing to figure out the timeline. But it's written in the perspective of people around him. So like his father, kind of, his brother, like Theseus, his nephew and stuff. And it's like really interesting to kind of see all the different takes on what they think of Hercules.
Probably Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. So I love the book, it's really interesting, but it's super sciencey, and it just took me longer than usual to read it. I'm normally a really quick reader, but I really wanted to take everything in. So like normally I'll try and read it to fall asleep, and I just couldn't because I had to like really get into it. But it was really interesting subject matter. And
Hope by, I believe it was Niall Harbison. He rescues dogs in Thailand. I first saw him on Instagram and I saw that he's got this book. And I mean, I love dogs, so you know, reading all this stuff about the stuff that people can do to dogs. It was quite challenging, not quite in a, you know, like a deeper sense, but, you know, physically reading about some of the stuff that, you know, the dogs have had to do, and the treatment and all that stuff. It was quite tough.
And recently I had to read a book called This Spells Love for this book list I was working through, and it's not at all what I would normally read. I don't think I've ever read a kind of just a straight up romance book, and at first I really struggled to get into it, but by the end of it I actually really enjoyed it. Yeah, it was just because normally I read more like horror books.
The most challenging one right now has been Everything's Eventual by Stephen King. It took me a bit to get into his reading. Like, the stories are really cool, really interesting, but it just sometimes, it does this kind of very noir kind of thing with his writing. So it takes its time sometimes, and sometimes goes a bit around and around and around. But it does do that in a really good way, that it conveys a lot of messaging through doing so.
Really great, some really great reactions there. I wanted to ask you though, somebody there was reading, somebody had wonderful hair, was reading before bed. Where do you like to read, Hannah?
Oh, anywhere.
Anywhere and any time,
you know,
any place, anywhere.
Have book, will travel.
Like a martini.
I like reading while travelling. I do a lot of travelling for work, so on the train.
Lovely. How about you, Carice?
On the sofa.
Lovely. So that's all for part one. We're off to stretch our legs, but we'll see you for more book chat after our break. See you then. Hello again and welcome back to Knots TV Book Club, a time and place to talk about books with me, Becky Cullen. All cosied up on the book club sofas this month are Carice Hutchinson from Writing East Midlands and the Playhouse Youth Board, Hannah Trevarthen from Nottingham UNESCO City of Literature, and the lovely Jake Wildhall from Waterstones and Bad Betty Press. Hello again, panel. So we were talking before the break about books that were challenging. Have you got a book that you would put in that category? Jake, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think challenging in a good way. So I think All About Love by Bell Hooks, which is something I try and read yearly and kind of challenge me about how I think about love and how I think I interact with love, especially very beautiful chapter on parents.
I love that book. It's very beautiful.
Very beautiful.
Thank you for mentioning it. Thank you. Hannah?
Oh, I recently took a trip to Sheffield Theatres to see A Doll's House by Ibsen, and I found that challenging in a way. It was very tense because actually kind of drawing on themes of love and control and autonomy of women, and I spent the whole production sat on the edge of my seat feeling very tense. So it was challenging in that way. And also thinking about how have the roles of women changed and the role, like gender roles, and how we perform them as well.
When does it come from? What century does it come from?
Oh, it's a 19th century play, Norwegian.
Okay.
Very much about society and values in society, and how we think about social standing, which sadly I think still rings true.
Still exists today. Yeah. Yes, very, very much so. Thank you very much, Hannah. Carice, how about you?
Book I've been reading recently is Wrecking for a Dream. I love the movie, although it's a movie that deals with a lot of like difficult issues like substance abuse and addiction, and it's difficult for me to read because it's in American slang, and the way that the author writes as well is like the punctuation's a bit like off. So it's like Sally Rooney, people complain because she's got full stops. Was it full stops or speech marks or something? Kind of similar to that, but it's also really good in that way as well.
Brilliant. So it's a challenge, but it's a good challenge.
Yeah, good challenge.
Fantastic. So talking of challenges, let's get back to this book again. So the title and the way it is presented, how do you? Is there something that we know about this book before we even open it? Do you think? How do you reflect on the title, Hannah?
Well, I think it's purposefully provocative. I think it's asking us to think about, how potentially in industry there are some potentially performative, work within that, and also how, ideas around ownership and author voice, and I think it's. Yeah,
there's this whole debate, isn't there, about can you write these characters from, like, can you inhabit somebody else's lived experience as a writer? What's your view, Jake?
I just think that the main character in this book is so unlikable.
So this is Juniper Song.
Juniper Song is so unlikable, and I just think that every way that she interacts after she's been called out, and everything tells you that she shouldn't have interacted with the story. And I think that it's not that you can't tell you can't tell a story that has other people in it, but I do feel like the way that she interacts with the narrative is not productive.
There are some telltale comments and so on, that she was a mispronunciation of somebody's name and at a book panel, and she tries to make a joke of it. What's your view, Carice?
I think after June, she's not the best person to have written that book. There was like one part in Yellowface that stood out to me is when she rejects a sensitivity reader, and she just completely brushes it off. And like, I was laughing in my head because James was so entitled and so unlikable and just so annoying. But I think like, if like when doing the research and finding the right person, books, like you can write books about like something might not be for you as long as you have like a reason to write it, if that makes sense.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So if you do your research, you have your sensitivity reader, it becomes more acceptable, or it's done in the proper way.
Yeah.
What did you make of, so June is the want-to-be writer, and she takes this manuscript and she reshapes it really and edits it. So sometimes when she's doing readings of the book, she says, and this is a passage that I wrote. So is this, just to be provocative, is this theft really an act of translation, do you think? Or is it plagiarism? What do you all think?
What a question! So I think, as someone who used to work for an organisation that champions translation, you know, I think kind of translation is a collaboration. It's creating something new from another language, another culture, respectfully and in dialogue with that author and that text. I think in this book, I feel I would like to echo everybody else and say that I really didn't like Juniper, because it does feel like a theft for personal gain, whereas I think, you know, where you're talking about translation or adaptation, that is quite a generous act that is saying we want more people to read and engage with this. But in the book, it feels very like she's done it for her own gain, her own personal gain.
I was starting to warm slightly to Juniper at one point, especially when you find out the revelation about her own life. And then there's this section where she says, I double dipped. So you find out that she's done this again. She's got another passage from the notebook. And I was so shocked. I didn't know whether to laugh or gasp or, you know, it was so shocking to me that you would do that again. What did you think? Jake, did that surprise you, or were you expecting that?
I think by then, like, she's had so many opportunities to kind of come out and face it. And I think the bit for me that was like, well, nothing's going to change is the phone conversation with Athena's mum, and where she's still not able to own up to what she's done, and she's still not able to say, yeah, I did do this thing. And you just don't put anything past her at that point. And I think there was a point where maybe I was like, oh, she's getting a lot of trouble online. Should I feel bad for her? But she's just such a bad person.
She's a really bad person.
Yeah.
But she's not real, so that's okay. Carice, very briefly, what do you think about this representation of publishing as a writer?
It was very interesting for me to read because I haven't really looked into publishing before. Like, I'm a creative writer. I studied English and film at uni. I studied a master's in creative writing now. And as someone who is from like an ethnic minority group, wants to be published in the future, one of the interesting things that stood out to me is how like none of the Chinese Americans actually liked Athena.
Yeah.
Like a few of them didn't, because of how she was tokenized as like the like Chinese American writer. And I think that is very interesting, because it's definitely a thing that a lot of companies do. They'll find like a token black person or a token Chinese person. Like, this is the book of the year or the book of the month, and like the book is written very specific way that they want people to see, rather than actually reading and like understanding books from ethnic minority groups.
Thank you, Carice. That's a brilliant answer. Thank you very much. And thank you, panel, for your fantastic comments. So it's time to take a pause in the chat. I think we've got some recommendations from Jake Wild Hall.
So I just want to recommend some books that are flying off the shelf at Waterstones at the moment. Judi Dench's Shakespeare, the Man Who Pays the Rent.
Judy.
Oh, I love Judy, and I love Shakespeare, and it's going to be fantastic. Then I have also want to recommend Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which I read last year and was one of my favourite books of last year.
Okay, tell us a little bit about it.
It's about two friends who knew each other years ago, then didn't see each other, had a chance meeting on the underground, and then form a games development company.
Do you think Judi Dench would like playing those games?
At least one of them,
Yes.
I think. Yeah. I've seen her do a collaboration with Lethal Bizzle, so
Yes.
maybe she'll
Lovely.
play video games too.
And a very, very special poetry collection.
Yeah, so the last one I want to talk about is Adam by Boyega Odebanjo, who was a dear friend of mine who passed away last year. It's a collection about the body of a boy that washed up on the Thames, the torso of a boy, and about what that means and about how people interact with blackness and how blackness matters. And it's beautiful, and it was just shortlisted for the T.S. Eliot Prize.
Thank you very much, Jake. That, unfortunately, is all from us for this month. You can email us, though, at notstvbookclub@ntu.ac.uk, or find us on social media with your comments and questions. We'd really love to hear from you, especially if you're in a book club yourself, you have a book that you'd like to recommend. I'm looking at you, the Hideaway Cafe Book Club in Beeston. Look out for us every second Tuesday and through the week on Nots TV. For all scheduling, check notstv.com. Next month, for the first time on Book Club, we're talking about short stories. So why not get hold of Elsewhere Home by Layla Abilayla and get reading? You can find all the details about what's coming up on our website, notstvbookclub.com. That's all for now. Thank you so much to Carice, to Hannah and to Jake. And thank you to you, of course, for watching. Happy reading.
Not that bins aren't fabulous, but like, is it?